The aroma of sautéing garlic filled the air as I stirred the simmering marinara sauce, my mind wandering through the last 10 years of my life. My kitchen, with its gleaming countertops and perfectly arranged spices, was a sanctuary where I often found solace. I hummed softly to the tune of an old song, the rhythm easing the tension that had been creeping into my marriage with Mark. It had been a decade since we exchanged vows, a decade filled with shared laughter, countless memories, and the comfortable routine that had become our life. But lately, something felt amiss. I glanced at the clock on the wall. Mark would be home any minute, and I hoped that tonight would feel different, more connected. I couldn't shake the feeling that a chasm had formed between us, one that widened with each passing day. As I chopped fresh basil, I recalled our last few conversations, filled with polite pleasantries rather than the deep discussions we once enjoyed. I sighed, pushing the thoughts away. We'd figure it out, I told myself. After all, we loved each other. When the front door creaked open, I turned to see Mark step inside, his charming smile lighting up the room. "Hey there, chef," he greeted, running a hand through his hair. "What's cooking?" "Just your favorite, spaghetti and meatballs," I replied, trying to match his enthusiasm. "Smells amazing," he said, leaning in to plant a quick kiss on my cheek. But as he stepped back, I caught a glimpse of something beneath his smile, a flicker of distraction in his eyes. "How was your day?" I asked, hoping to draw him out of whatever thoughts were pulling him away from me. "Oh, the usual. Work was hectic," he said, shrugging off my question. "Just trying to keep up with deadlines." I nodded, feeling the familiar ache of disconnect. "What about you? Did you catch up with Jake today?" "Yeah, a bit," he replied, his gaze drifting towards the window, as if searching for something outside. "He's been doing well. We talked about the upcoming neighborhood barbecue." "Sounds fun," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. Jake was our neighbor, a genuinely nice guy, and I enjoyed his company. But there was an undeniable chemistry between us that made me a bit uneasy. Mark's smirk returned, but it felt different this time, almost knowing. "You always did get along well with him," he said, a teasing lilt in his voice. I chuckled nervously, brushing off the implication. "We're just friends, Mark." "Of course," he replied, but I could sense the weight behind his words. As we settled down for dinner, the conversation remained light, but the air hummed with an unspoken tension. I watched Mark as he twirled the pasta on his fork, his mind clearly elsewhere. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap that seemed to stretch between us, but I didn't know how. Later that evening, we hosted a small gathering with Jake, hoping that the company would lighten the mood. As he stepped into our home, his easy smile and warm presence filled the space, instantly lifting my spirits. "Wow, this looks incredible," he exclaimed, glancing at the table set for three. "Thanks, Jake. Just trying to impress," I said with a playful grin, the familiarity between us settling like a comfortable blanket. Mark poured drinks, his demeanor shifting as he watched Jake and me interact. "So, Jake," Mark said, a sly smile creeping onto his face, "how's your love life these days?" "Non-existent, as usual," Jake replied, laughing. "I'm too busy with work to think about dating." "Maybe you need to take a break and enjoy life a little more," I suggested, a hint of mischief in my tone. "Maybe I do," Jake said, his eyes sparkling with a playful challenge. As the evening progressed, I found myself laughing at Jake's stories, the chemistry between us undeniable. It was innocent fun, or at least I tried to convince myself of that. Mark watched us with a smirk, but there was something in his expression that I couldn't quite place. Was it amusement, jealousy, or something deeper? When the night wound down and Jake finally left, I sighed, feeling a mix of exhilaration and confusion. Mark stood by the door, arms crossed, a bemused look on his face. "You two seem to have a great time." Just having fun, I replied, trying to sound casual. Yeah, just fun, he echoed, his tone laced with something I couldn't decipher. As I turned to head back to the kitchen, I felt his gaze on me, and for a moment, I wondered if he knew something I didn't. I brushed it off, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. After all, it was just an evening among friends, wasn't it? But deep down, a seed of uncertainty began to sprout, whispering that perhaps our lives were about to take a turn I couldn't foresee. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as I stood at the counter, chopping vegetables for dinner. The rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board was oddly soothing, yet my mind was anything but calm. Mark had surprised me that morning with his bizarre suggestion about spending more time with Jake. The idea felt like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces, leaving me confused and apprehensive. Sarah, I really think this will help us. Mark's voice echoed in my head, his tone earnest yet unsettling. I could still see the way he had leaned against the kitchen island, arms crossed, that charming smile of his plastered on his face. You and Jake get along so well. Spending more time together could strengthen our relationship. I remembered how my heart had raced at the thought of being around Jake more. He was magnetic, his laughter infectious, and the way he looked at me had a way of making me feel alive. But was that what Mark intended? To ignite some sort of spark between us? I shook my head, trying to dispel the swirling thoughts. Later that afternoon, I found myself at the park, pushing my son on the swings while Jake jogged by. He paused, slowing his pace. Hey, Sarah. Fancy seeing you here, he called, his voice bright and warm like the sun overhead. Hey, Jake. Just enjoying the day with my little one, I replied, trying to keep the conversation light and casual. The truth was, my heart raced every time Jake drew near. Mind if I join you? He asked, jogging in place as if he were waiting for my approval. Of course not, I replied, my voice betraying the excitement bubbling within me. As he settled on the bench beside me, I felt the familiar flutter in my stomach. So, how's life treating you? He asked, glancing over at my son, who was giggling and swinging higher. Pretty good, just the usual, busy with work and family. How about you? I asked, trying to focus on the conversation instead of the small electric sparks that flew between us. Can't complain. Just got back from a long run. It clears my mind, he said, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. You should join me sometime. It's a great way to unwind. Running? Me? I don't know about that. I laughed, trying to dismiss the idea. But the truth was, the thought of running alongside him, the rhythm of our feet hitting the pavement, filled me with an unexpected thrill. Why not? I promise you'll have fun. Plus, I'll keep you company, he teased, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Okay, maybe I'll think about it, I said, biting my lip, wrestling with the thought of what Mark would say if he knew. After the park, I returned home, my mind racing. I couldn't help but feel drawn to Jake, and the more I resisted that attraction, the more potent it became. That evening, as I settled on the couch with a glass of wine, I found myself reaching for my phone, contemplating texting Lisa. Hey, Lisa, can we talk? I typed, my fingers hesitating over the send button. I needed to voice my confusion, to untangle the web of emotions that was becoming increasingly complicated. When Lisa arrived, she plopped down next to me, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. What's going on, Sarah? You seem off today. I sighed, the weight of my feelings pressing down on me. It's Mark. He wants me to spend more time with Jake. He thinks it'll help our relationship. Lisa raised an eyebrow, her expression shifting to one of incredulity. That's unusual. How do you feel about it? I shrugged, a mix of emotions swirling like a tempest inside me. I don't know, Lisa. Part of me thinks it's harmless, but another part is scared. What if it leads to something more? Boundaries, Sarah. You need to be careful. This could get messy, she warned, her voice serious. I know, but he's just so easy to be around. I admitted, my cheeks flushing as I thought of his laughter and the way he made me feel. Just tread lightly. You have to think about what you really want. As Lisa left, I found myself standing alone in the quiet of the house, my heart racing. Part of me wanted to dive headfirst into whatever was happening with Jake, but another part of me clung to the remnants of my marriage. I felt like I was teetering on the edge, unsure of which way to lean. Would I fall into a new world of excitement with Jake, or would I step back and try to mend the frayed edges of my life with Mark? The weeks drifted by, and each meeting with Jake felt like a fragile thread weaving itself into the fabric of my life. I found myself caught in a dance of emotions, a precarious balance between guilt and exhilaration. One sunny afternoon, I met Jake at a quaint cafe nestled in the heart of our suburb. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed the way the sunlight danced in his eyes, illuminating the warmth that drew me closer. "Sarah, you have to try this pastry," he exclaimed, leaning closer, his voice low and inviting. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I couldn't help but smile. "It's the best in town, I promise." "All right, I'll take your word for it," I replied, a teasing grin spreading across my face. I felt a flutter in my chest, a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. With each shared laugh and lingering glance, the chemistry between us intensified, as if we were two magnets drawn together against all odds. But as the days wore on, my heart grew heavy with the weight of my decisions. I was betraying Mark, the man I had shared a decade of my life with. Yet, every time I brushed shoulders with Jake, I felt alive. He didn't just see me. He saw the woman I once was, the one filled with dreams and desires that had slowly faded under the routine of everyday life. "Jake, can I ask you something?" I ventured one evening as we sat on his porch, the twilight casting a golden glow around us. "Of course, anything," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "What do you think love is?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It felt like a loaded question, but I needed to hear his perspective. He pondered for a moment, staring into the distance. "Love is complicated. It's about connection, trust, but also about freedom. You can't force it. You have to let it flow." His words struck a chord within me. Freedom. A word that felt foreign yet tantalizing. That evening, as a movie played in the background, I felt the tension in the air shift. Jake leaned in, our shoulders brushing, his breath warm against my skin. I could feel the pull between us, an electric current that ignited every nerve ending in my body. My heart raced as he tilted his head slightly, and before I could think, I closed the distance between us. Our lips met, and in that moment, the world around us faded away. The kiss was soft yet passionate, filled with a longing that had been building for weeks. It was a whirlwind of emotions, exhilaration, fear, and an undeniable craving for something more. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and wide-eyed, I felt both liberated and terrified. "Wow," Jake whispered, a grin spreading across his face. "I didn't expect that." "Neither did I admitted, my heart pounding. "But there's so much at stake." "I know," he said, his voice steady. "But what we have is real, Sarah. You can't deny that." Conflicted, I hurried home, my mind swirling with thoughts. I needed to confront Mark about what had just happened. As I entered the house, the familiar scent of our home enveloped me, but it felt different now, tainted by my secret. "Mark," I called, but there was no answer. My heart sank as I made my way to the living room, and that's when I heard it, the low, heated tone of his voice coming from the other room. I paused, straining to listen. "No, I can't keep doing this," he said, his words sharp and filled with emotion. "You know, it's not what we agreed on." A chill ran down my spine. Who was he talking to? My heart raced as I moved closer, my breath hitching in my throat. I felt an overwhelming urge to confront him, to demand answers, but fear held me back. "Mark," I called out again, my voice trembling. He abruptly ended the call, turning to face me, his expression unreadable. In that moment, I knew I had to know the truth. The weight of my attraction to Jake clashed violently with the reality of my marriage, and I was caught in the eye of a storm I never wanted to enter. I woke up with a knot in my stomach, the remnants of last night's kiss with Jake replaying in my mind like a dizzying movie reel. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, but instead of warmth, it brought a chill. I knew I had to confront Mark about the phone call I'd overheard, but the thought of facing him made my pulse race. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself as I moved to the kitchen. "Hey, babe." Mark greeted me with a smile that felt more like a mask than genuine warmth. He was sipping his coffee, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside me. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Sure. What's up?" He leaned against the counter, his demeanor casual, but I could see the flicker of concern in his eyes. "I heard you on the phone last night," I said, my heart pounding as I met his gaze. "You sounded intense. Who were you talking to?" Mark's smile faded, replaced by a guarded expression. "Oh, come on, Sarah. It was just work. You know how it is." I felt the tension rising, and I pressed on. "It didn't sound like just work. You were whispering. You never whisper when you talk about work." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're reading too much into it. I promise there's nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe him, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. "Mark, please, just tell me the truth. I need to know." He looked away, and in that moment, I felt the chasm between us widen. "It's nothing, really, just some old business contacts. You know how they can get." I took a step back, feeling increasingly isolated. My feelings for Jake were growing stronger, and with each passing day, my trust in Mark was fracturing. After a heavy silence, I decided to leave the conversation hanging, my heart heavy with unanswered questions. Later that evening, the thought of Jake was impossible to shake. I found myself reaching for my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed out a message to him. "Can we meet tonight?" I hit send before I could second-guess myself. I arrived at Jake's house, my heart racing with anticipation and guilt. The door swung open, and there was Jake looking as charming as ever, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "You came," he said, his voice low and inviting. "Yeah, I needed to talk," I replied, stepping inside, the air thick with unspoken tension. We settled onto the couch, the flickering light from the TV casting shadows around us. "What's on your mind?" he asked, leaning closer. I hesitated, my heart pounding. I don't know how to explain this, but after what happened last time, I feel like I'm losing my grip on everything. Jake's eyes softened, and he reached for my hand. "You deserve to feel alive, Sarah. Life is too short to play by the rules all the time." His words ignited a fire within me, and before I knew it, I leaned in, capturing his lips with mine. The kiss was electric, a spark that sent shivers down my spine. It felt so right yet so wrong. As our kiss deepened, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, but guilt washed over me like a tidal wave. Suddenly, I pulled back, breathless. "I shouldn't be doing this," I said, panic rising in my chest. Jake's expression turned serious. "But you wanna, don't you?" "Yes," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't keep lying to myself or to Mark." "Then stop lying," Jake urged, his voice low and intense. "You deserve happiness, Sarah. Don't let fear hold you back." As I headed home that night, I felt exhilarated yet terrified. The kiss had awakened something deep within me, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was walking a dangerous line. When I entered the house, I heard Mark's voice coming from the living room. He was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones, whispering sweet nothings that made my heart race. I froze by the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to hear. "No, I can't wait to see you," he said, and my breath caught in my throat. Who was he talking to? I felt the walls closing in around me, the weight of my choices crashing down like a wave. My mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, confusion, and an undeniable sense of urgency. I had to know the truth. As I stood there, torn between the man I thought I knew and the one I was falling for, I realized my life had become a tangled web of secrets and lies. I was caught in a storm, and I had no idea how to navigate my way out. The following week, I found myself spiraling deeper into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through Mark's phone, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark secrets hidden beneath our seemingly perfect life. There it was, a series of texts from a woman whose name I didn't recognize. Each message was a dagger, twisting in my gut as I read the intimate exchanges between them. It felt like a betrayal, so profound that I could barely breathe. "Babe, can't wait to see you tonight," one message read, followed by a heart emoji. My heart raced, not from desire, but from a suffocating sense of betrayal. As I sat on the edge of our bed, I fought against the tears that threatened to spill. How could he do this to me? To us? I felt trapped in a web of lies, each thread pulling me tighter into a darkness I never imagined would envelop my life. The thought of confronting him weighed heavily on my mind. What would I even say? "Hey, I found texts on your phone. Care to explain?" I scoffed at the absurdity of it all. My heart raced with anger and disbelief, yet I knew I had to confront him. That evening, as I prepared for dinner, I could feel the tension in the air thickening, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Mark, oblivious to the turmoil within me, hummed a tune as he set the table, his demeanor as carefree as ever. It was maddening. "Are you excited for dinner?" he asked, flashing that charming smile that had once made my heart flutter. "Yeah, excited," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mark, we need to talk." He paused, his expression shifting from cheerful anticipation to cautious curiosity. "About what?" I took a deep breath, my palms clammy against the cool surface of the kitchen counter. "About us. About you and me." "Is everything okay?" he asked, concern etching itself into his features. "Do you think everything is okay?" I shot back, a mix of anger and hurt spilling over. "I found messages on your phone, messages from another woman." Mark's face paled, the color draining from his cheeks. "Sarah, Don't," I interrupted, my voice trembling with the weight of my emotions. "Just don't. You can't deny it. I saw it with my own eyes." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair, his facade cracking. Okay. Yes, I've been seeing someone. But it's not what you think. Not what I think. You're having an affair, Mark." My heart raced as I struggled to contain my mounting frustration. "How can you say it's not what I think?" He stepped closer, his tone shifting to a defensive edge. "It's a non-emotional relationship, Sarah. It means nothing to me. I swear." I laughed bitterly, the sound echoing off the walls of our once happy home. "A non-emotional affair? Is that supposed to make me feel better? You're betraying me, Mark. Do you even realize the implications of what you're saying?" He hesitated, visibly wrestling with his words. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I just what?" I pressed, unable to contain the hurt that had welled up inside me. "You just wanted to have your cake and eat it too? I thought we were in a rut, and I wanted to see if we could find ourselves again," he said, his voice softening. I thought maybe seeing other people would help. Seeing other people? I echoed, incredulous. So, you thought it was okay for me to be with Jake? Is that your idea of fixing our marriage? Mark's expression faltered, and I saw the anger flash in his eyes for a split second. Yes, actually. I thought you'd be open to it. Open to it? I felt the walls closing in, my vision narrowing. You think I'd be okay with sharing you? Sharing my life with someone else? Jake is different, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He's just a friend. I didn't think it would lead to this. Lead to what? Mark? You're the one who suggested I spend time with him. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. The betrayal felt like ice coursing through my veins. And then, in that charged moment, Mark dropped the bombshell that would change everything. You know, Sarah, I've been watching Jake closely. I know how he looks at you. I know how you look at him. My stomach twisted at his words. What are you saying? I'm saying I won't let him get too close to you, he replied, a strange mixture of possessiveness and protectiveness in his voice. Not when I know what I've done. The air between us crackled with unresolved tension, secrets threatening to explode. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run away from this mess we had created. Instead, I stood frozen, caught between the man I once loved and the one who had ignited a fire in my heart, a fire that now felt like a raging inferno, consuming everything in its path. I slammed the door behind me, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. My heart raced as I stumbled down the walkway, the cool air hitting my flushed cheeks. I needed to get away, away from the betrayal, away from the life I thought I knew. Mark's admission had shattered everything I believed about our marriage, and I felt a magnetic pull toward Jake, my neighbor who had become so much more than just a friendly face. As I approached Jake's house, I could feel adrenaline coursing through my veins, mixing with an undeniable thrill. I knocked on the door, my breath coming in quick bursts. When Jake opened it, a look of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by concern. Sarah, what's wrong? He asked, stepping aside to let me in. The warmth of his home enveloped me, a stark contrast to the icy reality I'd just left behind. Mark, he knows everything, I blurted out, my voice a mix of panic and liberation. He knows about us. Jake's expression shifted, a flicker of anxiety behind his charming facade. What do you mean? How? He confronted me at dinner. He admitted he was cheating, and then I paused, taking a deep breath to steady myself. He mentioned you. He said you were involved. A flash of anger crossed Jake's face, but he quickly masked it with concern. Did he hurt you? No, but that doesn't matter right now. I don't want to think about him. I need to be here with you. Before I could second-guess myself, I stepped closer, and Jake pulled me into his arms. The warmth of his body was intoxicating, and I melted against him, feeling safe for the first time in what felt like forever. Are you sure about this? He murmured, his breath warm against my ear. The sincerity in his voice sent shivers down my spine, igniting a fire I thought had long since been extinguished. I don't want to think anymore. I just want to feel, I whispered, tilting my head up to find his gaze. There was a moment of hesitation, and then our lips crashed together, igniting a passion that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. Just as things began to heat up, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the moment. My heart sank. No, it can't be, I whispered, pulling away from Jake and darting to the window. My worst fears materialized as I spotted Mark's car parked in front. Sarah, what's happening? Jake asked, confusion clouding his handsome features. Mark is here. He's outside, I said, panic rising in my throat. Before I could process my next move, the door swung open, and Mark stepped inside, his presence instantly filling the room with tension. Well, what do we have here? He said, his voice low and dangerous, eyes narrowing at Jake. Mark, wait, I shouted, stepping in front of Jake as if my body could shield him from the tempest brewing. Oh, I'm waiting, Sarah. I've been waiting for this moment, Mark replied, a bitter smile on his lips. You thought you could play house with my brother? What? The word escaped my lips, heavy with disbelief. My mind raced, trying to piece together the chaotic puzzle before me. Jake is my brother, Mark revealed, his tone dripping with contempt. I orchestrated this entire situation to see if you would remain loyal to me. The room spun around me as I tried to comprehend what he was saying. You did this on purpose? I stammered, my heart pounding in my chest. You used him to test me? Exactly, Mark said, his expression a blend of triumph and frustration. I needed to know if you were worth my trust, but look at you now. You're just as weak as I thought. Are you insane? I yelled, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. You set this all up and you think you're the victim? Mark's gaze hardened. I wasn't going to let you ruin our life together without knowing the truth. And you just confirmed what I feared all along. I felt the room close and around me, every breath heavy with the weight of realization. I was caught in the middle of a twisted game between two men who had turned my life into a nightmare. I looked between Mark and Jake, both of whom had played their parts in this emotional charade, and I felt frozen, my heart racing as I grappled with the truth. Sarah, I didn't know, Jake said, stepping closer, but I held up my hand to stop him. I need to think, I managed, my voice trembling as the reality of my shattered life crashed down around me. I stood there, caught between two worlds, unsure of which path to take in this labyrinth of deception.